Yeah, so what helped when I was picking up multiple editors over the course of LD1? Luckily, most of the editors from LD1 are pretty simple. It's going to be different for any class going forward, potentially, but the editors that we worked with, Portal, its editor, Doom, SnapMap, Super Meat Boy editor, and Half-Life 2 Hammer editor, which is the full first actual editor that we got to touch. Portal and SnapMap, they're built in. They're community tools. They're really hand-holdy. There's a lot of guide rails and towards it, and there's a lot of just really neat tutorials online that are just really flawless, especially for SnapMap. And one thing that really helped with Doom, and I think anyone else would agree, is there was a large collaborative effort from the cohort coming into Doom and trying to figure it out, because we entered into Doom and Profo was like, yeah, so there's just no tutorials whatsoever. There was some kind of server wiki malfunction and we have nothing. So I felt like everyone just kind of like took it upon themselves to figure it out, and there was like that really triumphant moment when we figured out how to make the chainsaw drop ammo like it would in the main campaign. That was awesome, but it was like a lot of communicating across lines and just other LDs and being like, did you figure this thing out? Mm-hmm. One thing I did, and I'd be willing to share them if anyone wants, I would just grind the midnight oil, and I made videos for the rest of my team when I would figure something out. So like I found problems that other members of my team in their campaign were having, and I would look into it, and I'd be like, all right, so hey guys, this is my OBS video here. I just want to show you, like, here's some neat stuff that I figured out about the Doom SnapMap editor, and I made like 4 or 5 videos over the course of the campaign, and then I would distribute them to my team, and so that we were all on the same page of like, here are mechanics that we are sharing between our campaign, here's how you set them up. Okay. And that was, again, like, this is me just talking about my LD1 experience, but the biggest piece of advice I can give you is just play around with it. Get in there, just like, look at it as like Legos, you know? Figure out, how does this snap to this, or like how does this connect to this, and then once you start understanding those basic fundamentals, build off them. You know, the Hammer editor is the most obtuse thing in the world when you first start, but once you start learning how to manipulate BSP, which is going to be very important, because even when you go into Unreal, it's just as fundamental. Like, once you've got that down and you just start throwing things together, start throwing buildings in, start throwing in LOD things in the background so you can make nice environments, you're going to be able to just make things faster. And it's like, the first time you're going to get a chance to touch those editors is when you're going to do action blocks. I would almost advise just making things, just make a test bed, just start throwing things in, just not something that you're not going to submit, something that you can just fuck around with. I mean, I don't know if you're caring about swearing, but just like, because having those burner sandboxes, you're going to learn a lot more from your failures than you are going to from like the tutorials where you're just following along.
For picking up editors in LD1, we do pick up a lot of editors. I think there's 4, which is Super Meat Boy editor, which is an incomplete editor, but the tutorial they give us is pretty useful because of the way not a lot of things are communicated well in the editor. It tells you, like, here's what layers Super Meat Boy should go on, here's what layers things that he touches should go on, here's how to animate them. So I would suggest following that. Portal and SnapMap are built-in editors. They're made for the community to use. They're made to be fun. They have a lot of visual things that tell you, like, this jump pad will send you this far. This node connects to this node so that you know that they're talking to each other. And then finally, once you move to the big one, which is Hammer, that just involves watching a lot of tutorials. A lot of us actually sat in the TGP room for a couple nights and just worked through tutorials and shared our thoughts. And by the end, we had a stronger understanding of the editor. So some of it comes from take the time to sit through the tutorials, and some of it comes from talk to your friends, both your upperclassmen and your peers, about what they've learned about the editor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think depending on the editor, you have different strategies, because some of them are a lot more user-friendly and some of them are a lot more like technical heavy, but I would say rely a lot on like the wiki and the tutorials that other SMU Guildhall students have put out beforehand, because a lot of them are a lot more valuable than you think, and probably some tutorial exists for the thing you're already trying to do. But for just going ground zero into a brand new editor, I think it's really just exposure. It's just practice. So I know that a lot of the assignments early on are about practicing and making, sample maps and things like that. Don't phone in those assignments. Don't make like a 3-room thing and then call it a day. Really try and put in as much like challenging effort into those, because the more problem solving you do early on, the less you're going to have to do when you're actually making the final level for it. And believe me, you're going to have more than enough at that stage already. So try to put in as much legwork early on into just figuring out how everything works and puts together, and try and figure out a couple of those like challenges you have rattling around in your head of like, how do I make this work in this engine early on, because then you already know how to do it later on.
Yeah, so for picking up new editors and getting comfortable with them, I'd say what helped me a lot was always reminding myself that I wasn't supposed to be good at it right away. Like I wasn't supposed to know where everything was right away. And through a trial and error, like making mistakes on each like assignment or like milestone, I would remember like, oh, I messed this part up, but then going into the next one, I've made like a note of like how I could do that better. So just being willing to make mistakes, I guess, is what helped me a lot.
One thing that really helped me in getting a good grasp of a new editor is, you start out with nothing. Hopefully you know something about the game because you do this deconstruction on it, but you know nothing about what making a level in this game looks like. So those early stages of action blocks, prototyping, the practice assignments are really, really important. I would argue a little more important than the deconstruction. I mean, the deconstruction is great to know like the game that you're making, but knowing how to quickly iterate on ideas in these new editors is really, really important to do. So do take your time, do a bunch of tutorials for it early on, because you're gonna have more free time in these early stages. But you should focus more of your energy on getting familiar, getting comfortable with this tool, and just try a bunch of different things. Whether or not you want to make your level about these ideas that you try, just try to get a good understanding of all the ins and outs of the software that you'll be using, and it's going to make your life for actually making the level so much easier as you go forward.